I'd like to say a word on the events that have unfolded in the last few weeks, particularly the looting and vandalization of critical infrastructure, the looting of COVID-19 warehouses, and the looting of other places that are not COVID-19 warehouses. A friend of mine lost a tractor to the looters, and the tractor was not only made away with, but within an hour, they were in pieces. And as I look at the pictures, the kind of pictures you see in front of you, as I looked at those pictures on social media and on television, I was filled with shame and a measure of guilt. I was overwhelmed with shame because in the 21st century, and for a country that is so abundantly blessed by God, that we should have millions of people, and not only young people, by the way. Some of those who went out to loot were not in their 20s. But let's say the majority were young. That we should have millions of our young people who would literally die for a bag of rice. That we have millions of people who will climb the roof of a tall warehouse and remove the roof, remove the zinc and the planks just to be able to get a carton of Indomie. That a country as blessed as our country with natural and human resources, that we can harbor millions of young people who are unemployed, who are unemployable, who today have no sense of hope, no hope for the future. They are unemployed today, they are unemployable today, and they have no sense of hope about the future. They are today despairing. They are desperate and are despairing. That we should have millions of young people who think that they have nothing to lose. Who think that they have nothing to lose, and therefore they go on a destruction spree because they believe that their lives do not count. And so the life of others do not count. That we have millions of young people who are so ill-motivated and so disconnected from our Commonwealth, so disconnected from Nigeria that they can set alight Nigerian Ports Authority, that they can set alight critical infrastructure. What it meant for me as I watched those pictures with all sadness is that these young people have no emotional connection with the country. These young people do not believe that the country is there for them. And so it is you and I, the elite, that care that the Ports Authority building is safe, because we import things that come through the ports. Those young people do not think that they have a stake in the Nigerian Ports Authority, that they have a stake in the NYSC camp, that they have a stake in any of the infrastructures that they pull down. I watched those pictures with sadness. I watched those pictures with pain. Some of them, I must confess, I could not watch. I watched, sadly, security agents joining the young people in looting because they themselves are desperately poor. They themselves are living below poverty line in a country that is blessed, rich with human and natural resources. I watched and I listened to a lot of people make comments about what has happened. A lot of people were very angry about what has happened. A lot of people were filled with resentment about the young people. And how terrible, how senseless, how idiotic our young people could be to burn all this and destroy all this. I listened to them. But perhaps I use this opportunity to ask them to take another look at what has happened. Yes, it is criminal to go to a psychiatric hospital and destroy the things there. It is criminal to go to an NYSC camp and destroy the things that are there. It is criminal to go to a TV station, radio station, or whatever. It is criminal. However, I would like those of us who sit down in the couches in our rooms, in our houses, who sit down in the comfort of our homes to make those condemnatory comments. I ask these critical questions. One, who are those youths that we call hooligans, vandals? Who are they? Did they come from Burkina Faso? Did they come from Jupiter? Who are these young people? Who are those we call hoodlums? The terminology hoodlum has become popular in Nigeria in the last 2 weeks. Anyone who didn't know what were called hoodlums have known. But who are these hoodlums? Did they come from Guinea-Bissau? Who are the political thugs? Who are the street urchins? Who are the area boys and area girls? Who are the almajirai on our streets? I sat down there watching these things and listening to people making self-righteous comments and condemnatory statements on what has happened. And I began to ask myself, why was my 33-year-old nephew not there to loot and destroy? I have a 33-year-old nephew. Why was he not there to join them to loot and destroy? I have a 23-year-old niece. Why was she not there to loot and destroy along with the others? How come none of my nieces and nephews were among those who were climbing those buildings and looting? How come that none of the children I adopted, none of the many children I adopted, how come that none of them was there to loot along with others? How come that none of the youths from our middle class families, that none of the youths in this chapel from our middle class families joined them to loot the warehouses and tear down buildings? How come? The answer I came about was that my 33-year-old nephew is a magistrate, and he, at the various times that these people went to loot, he was sitting in his court hearing cases. My 23-year-old niece is a doctor, and she was in her hospital treating patients. My adopted children are in school or busy preparing, doing online lessons where there is no school. Yes, the children of our middle class families are either overseas studying, working, or they are in elite schools in this country that have not closed for the past 9 months when ASU has been on strike. Aha! So it is the children of the poor. It is the children we have neglected. It is the children, the so-called hoodlums and hooligans, which we saw on TV, desperately looting COVID-19 palliatives last week. Those daredevil criminals we saw on TV recklessly burning down billions worth of businesses or critical infrastructure. They are the Nigerian children of yesterday. The Nigerian children of yesterday who never had the benefit of good parenting or parenting at all. They are the Nigerian children who received little or no moral education. They are the Nigerian children who never had the opportunity of a good education, if any education at all. Yes, they are those who today are unemployed, who are unemployable, who are jobless, who are hopeless, who are desperate. Many of them grew up on the streets, and all they know is the law of the jungle. What kind of law operates on the streets? The law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest. Many of them have lost hope, and they think they have nothing to lose. And when our young people think they have nothing to lose, none of us is safe. When you raise a herd of young people who think they have nothing to lose, then we are all in trouble because none of us is safe. It is said that if you raise a child like an animal in an environment only fit for animals, that child will grow up to behave like a wild animal. This is what we have done to millions of our youth. Sisters and brothers, see what we have done to millions of our youth. Those we call hoodlums, those we call vandals, those we call hooligans. They are our children. They are the children of our neighbors. See what we have rendered their lives. See how we have destroyed their lives by our selfishness, by our blindness, by our myopia. We think we can take care of ourselves and leave the rest. But nature does not accept a situation. Nature abhors a situation of islands of affluence in the midst of a sea of poverty. Nature doesn't accept it. Yes, God always forgives. Man sometimes forgives, but nature never forgives. You offend nature, nature pays back. Nemesis has caught up with us. We are beginning to harvest where we sowed. And so I remember the poem I wrote several years ago, warning about this kind of situation. The scenario that is playing out now, I had warned. In the last 30 years, I have been crying. This poem was written 25 years ago. I have been crying that if we do not change the structure of our society, if we do not change our financial economic structure, if we do not change our social structure, if we continue to operate an apartheid in the same society, that we are doomed. The future is doomed. I wrote this several years ago. It's in my book, Fragments of Truth. Nemesis is the irony of injustice and abuse. Those who decree poverty for the poor and legislate misery for the lowly can neither prosper alone nor in isolation have peace. For the culture of poverty brings not only hunger and starvation, the culture of poverty also brings violence and disorder. I wrote also several years ago, Scandal. Daddy has eaten the sour grapes, and today my brothers and sisters are gnashing their teeth. Mommy has tasted the forbidden fruit, and now the kids are out naked in the cold. They have desecrated the tree of love and violated the sanctuary of justice. And so the children flee from wisdom's child and fall into the callous embrace of the angel of death. Tomorrow has become a stone wall that my brothers and sisters stare at with angry desperation. Cursed be that day, that blind day, when daddy resolved to steal food off the hands of his own children. Alas, for that dark hour when mommy chose to mortgage tomorrow for the fleeting pleasures of today. From Petals of Truth, page 105. It was Dom Helder Camara, former Archbishop in Brazil, who said, when I give food to the poor, they will call me a saint. But when I ask, why don't the poor have food? Why have the poor no food? They call me a rebel, a communist. When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. The question we're asking now is, why have the poor no food? Because we could have organized for the poor to have food. It is time for us to repent. I call on all of us who are privileged, all of us who were not there with the looters, with the so-called hooligans, with the so-called vandals, all of us who didn't join them, who are comfortable enough, who didn't need that carton of Indomie for our dinner. I call on all of us to repent, to do the much needed restitution and take responsibility for the future. We, the privileged elite, and I mean the political elite, the economic elite, the social elite, the religious elite, who have had the benefit of good parenting, those of us who have had the benefit of good education, those of us who are privileged to have jobs, to have families to go to, who live in decent houses, who perhaps drive around in our own cars, we must get to work immediately and begin to take responsibility for the future. Time is running out. What did I say? Time is indeed running out for all of us. And all of us must take responsibility. It's not only the president or governors or government officials. All of us must take responsibility and do something. Do something. Whatever. Do something so that one or two young people can be taken off the streets. If all of us who are privileged do something to take one or two children out of the streets, then we may have a future to plan for. Otherwise, it's bad news. We don't have a future to look forward to.